Francis Ngannou. At first, Francis was one of Dana's favorite fighters. His story from growing up in poverty in Africa and working in sand mines to becoming a dominant force in the UFC was inspirational. His big breakthrough came when he knocked out Stipe at UFC 260 to win the heavyweight title. He later defended it against Cyril Gane, but things started to fall apart after that, especially when Dana refused to put the belt on him, breaking the usual tradition for champions. Francis became extremely frustrated with how the UFC treated its fighters and how little he was being paid. He was open about these issues, especially the low pay, which didn't sit well with the organization. He wanted to try boxing to earn more, but Dana and the UFC wouldn't allow it. Francis, fed up with the lack of support and blocked opportunities, made it clear he wanted something better. Dana tried to keep him with a record-breaking payday, which could have made him the highest-paid UFC fighter in history, but Francis had already made up his mind. In 2023, he walked away from the UFC and vacated his title. He later signed with the PFL and made his boxing debut against Tyson Fury, where he earned $10 million, massively more than his biggest UFC payday, which was just $600,000. This one is low-key sad. It all started back in 2007 when Randy was still a top name in the UFC. He was the heavyweight champ and a legit legend in the sport. But behind the scenes, he wasn't happy. He felt disrespected and underpaid, especially when guys like Brock Lesnar were walking in fresh from WWE and making way more money. Randy felt like the UFC didn't appreciate what he brought to the table, so he straight up quit while still holding the heavyweight belt. He said it was because of lack of respect and not being appreciated. Dana White, of course, didn't take that lightly. He fired back, calling Randy selfish and saying the UFC had treated him really well. Then it got legal. The UFC filed a lawsuit to stop Randy from fighting anywhere else even though he had quit. Basically because Randy was still under contract, even if he walked away, he couldn't just sign with another promotion. So Randy was stuck. Couldn't fight anywhere to make money doing what he did best. Eventually, after about a year of legal back and forth, Randy came back to the UFC to finish out his contract, but things were never the same. Dana held that grudge for years. When Randy later wanted to come back and coach on The Ultimate Fighter, a UFC reality TV show, Dana straight up blocked it and gave the job to someone else. Not only that, Dana took it out on Randy's son, Ryan. Ryan was a decent fighter, but Dana never gave him a push or any spotlight. He later admitted he didn't want to promote Ryan's career because of how much he disliked Randy. The beef went so deep it affected the next generation. Mark Hunt. His beef with Dana White and the UFC is one of the ugliest. It all started after Hunt fought Brock Lesnar at UFC 200. Lesnar won by decision, but it turned out he failed multiple drug tests before and after the fight. Mark was furious. He felt the UFC knew about Brock's failed tests, but let the fight happen anyway just to cash in on the hype. After that, Hunt went off. He accused the UFC of protecting cheaters and not caring about fighter safety. He demanded Lesnar's purse and even sued both the UFC and Lesnar for fraud and racketeering. That lawsuit dragged on for years and got really messy. In response, Dana White pretty much blacklisted him. Mark claimed the UFC tried to force him out by giving him tough matchups. He said Dana didn't care about fighters unless they were big money makers and accused him of running the UFC like a mafia boss. Even after retiring, Hunt didn't hold back. He continued bashing Dana in interviews, calling him names. Mark's lawsuit was eventually dismissed, but the bitterness never went away. Ken Shamrock. It all goes back to Ken feeling disrespected by the UFC after being one of its original stars. Ken was a pioneer, one of the first guys to make MMA mainstream in the 90s, but once the UFC blew up under Dana's leadership, Ken felt like he was pushed aside and forgotten. Things got worse in the mid-2000s when Ken was still fighting in the UFC, including his famous trilogy with Tito Ortiz. After losing those fights, Dana publicly said Ken was irrelevant and should retire. That didn't sit well with him. He felt Dana was using him for views and then trashing his legacy when it was convenient. Then came the lawsuit. In 2008, Ken sued the UFC for breach of contract after they released him following a failed drug test. He argued that he still had fights left on his deal. The court sided with the UFC, and Ken had to pay the legal fees. That made things even worse between him and Dana. After that, he started taking shots in interviews calling Dana a liar, a control freak, and someone who didn't care about fighters unless they made him money. Dana, as usual, clapped back by mocking Ken's record and saying he was just bitter and broke. The beef never really ended. Even in recent years, Ken has said Dana still doesn't give credit to the guys who built the UFC from the ground up. Chris Cyborg. Her beef with Dana White goes way back, even before she joined the UFC. Dana used to publicly mock her and once said she looked like Wanderlei Silva in a dress, which Cyborg and her fans saw as sexist and disrespectful. When she finally signed with the UFC in 2016, things didn't get better. The UFC kept making her cut down to dangerous weights instead of letting her fight at her natural weight. The real drama hit after she lost to Amanda Nunes in 2018. Dana started saying Cyborg didn't want a rematch, but Cyborg denied that. To prove it, she posted a backstage video where she secretly recorded Dana. In the video, she told him, "I just want to let you know, for me, I want the rematch. I want to fight Amanda." Dana responded with, "I know, and I said that. I said that in the interviews." That made it seem like Dana had lied about her in public. But here's the twist. The video Cyborg posted was edited to cut out parts of Dana's response. Once people figured that out, Cyborg's team admitted to the edit and she apologized publicly. Still, Dana wasn't having it and said, "We're out of the Cyborg business," so the UFC let her walk. Cyborg later signed with Bellator and kept criticizing Dana for lying, bullying fighters, and not supporting women properly. Nate Diaz. It started early in his UFC career. Nate felt like he wasn't getting paid what he was worth, especially after becoming a fan favorite. Even after headlining big fights, he was getting smaller checks than guys who were less popular than him. He's always said the UFC underpays fighters and has called out Dana and the UFC for being cheap. The tension hit a boiling point after Nate beat Conor McGregor in 2016. It was a massive win, and Nate became a superstar overnight. But instead of getting treated like a top dog, he felt like the UFC didn't want him on top. He claimed they tried to lowball him in contract negotiations and delay his next fight. Dana and Nate had public back and forths, with Nate saying Dana is a liar, and that he always sides with company guys, and even accused the UFC of trying to bury him because he didn't play the corporate game. In 2022, the beef came back when Nate Diaz wanted out of his UFC contract. He accused the UFC of holding him hostage, saying they wouldn't give him a fight unless it was against Khamzat. Nate said he didn't like being used as a stepping stone, but the fight with Khamzat was eventually booked. However, Khamzat missed weight badly, and the UFC had to replace him at the last minute. Nate ended up fighting Tony Ferguson instead and won. After that, he finally left the UFC. Tito Ortiz. Before the fallout, Dana and Tito were actually close. Back in the early days, Dana was Tito's manager. Tito even said Dana was like a big brother to him, but everything changed when Dana became the president of the UFC. Once Dana was in charge, Tito didn't see a friend anymore, he saw a boss. Tito began to feel like Dana had flipped sides. Dana, meanwhile, grew tired of Tito's demands. But they were still friends and respected each other. Fortunately for us, it all changed on a private flight to Japan. During that flight, the two decided to mess around and wrestle. It started out playful, then Tito got Dana in a rear naked choke, and Dana tapped. But Tito wouldn't let go, so Dana started blasting him in the ribs. After that, they didn't speak for a long time. Their relationship completely fell apart. They started clashing over everything. Dana claimed Tito had a habit of renegotiating deals after they were signed. Like, during fight week, Tito would throw a curveball like, "Pay me another $150,000 or I'm not walking out." Dana said it drove him insane, especially since Tito was one of the UFC's biggest stars and already making serious money. Then came the infamous boxing match. Tito agreed to sign a contract for a fight only if Dana agreed to box him, and surprisingly, Dana agreed. He trained for months, got in shape, and took it seriously. But when the weigh-in day came, Tito just didn't show. Dana was livid. He accused Tito of backing out, saying he was scared. Tito's side said the UFC changed the terms and tried to short him on the money. No matter who you believe, the fight never happened, and the bad blood only got worse. Tito added fuel to the fire whenever he could. At weigh-ins, he would wear a shirt that read, "Dana is my bitch." Dana fired back by saying Tito can't even read what is written on the shirt. Eventually, the dust settled. Tito said he had matured, and after one of his last fights, Dana even texted him congratulations. Fun fact, if you ever come across a Tito Ortiz video on Instagram, check the comments. You'll probably see Dana. I know this is not all the fighters that hate Dana. I only included the big ones. Almost everyone in the UFC hates Dana to a degree.